So right now, as you're listening to this, you might be, sitting in your living room.
Right.
You've locked your front door, shut the windows, and you feel completely separated from the outside world.
Safe and sound.
Exactly. But what if I told you that just inches above your ceiling, there might actually be an active, high-traffic highway?
Yeah, and it's definitely not for cars.
No, it is not. Tonight, we are going to look at what happens when the impenetrable fortress of your home actually acts as, like, a five-star luxury resort for local wildlife.
It really completely shatters that illusion we all have. I mean, we build these structures with brick and mortar and heavy timber, and we draw this psychological hard line.
Right, the line between us and nature.
Exactly. We think, inside is domestic and safe, and outside is the wild. But biologically and structurally, that line is basically a myth.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today's deep dive takes us into a really fascinating, somewhat hidden intersection of human real estate and relentless wildlife biology.
Relentless is definitely the right word. Yeah.
It really is. So we're poring over a massive service dossier from a highly specialized wildlife removal operation called the Critter Team. And this isn't happening out in some remote off-the-grid cabin.
Oh, no.
We are focusing specifically on Kingwood, Texas. And through their operational data, alongside guidelines from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, the CDC, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, the EPA, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we have a very clear mission today.
And that mission is understanding vulnerability. We are going to decode the elite scientific methods that are actually required to resolve these human-wildlife conflicts.
Because doing it wrong is a big deal, right?
It's huge. Doing it wrong doesn't just mean the animal comes back. It can mean catastrophic structural damage to your property or, honestly, severe health risks to your family.
Wow. Okay, so I want to start by setting the scene a bit because Kingwood is uniquely positioned for this kind of conflict.
It really is.
Yeah, it's not your standard concrete grid suburb where the biggest piece of nature is like a manicured sapling in the median. It is literally known as the Livable Forest.
Which sounds idyllic.
It does. You're talking about 14,000 acres of dense, established canopy, pine, oak, magnolia trees, plus it sits right along the water, hugging Lake Houston and the San Jacinto River.
Which, is a beautiful place for a person to live. But from an ecological standpoint, we have to look at the infrastructure we've layered over that forest.
Right.
Kingwood has 75 miles of greenbelt trails weaving through all the different villages. Now, for a resident, that's a lovely shaded biking path.
Sure.
But for the local ecosystem, it is essentially an uninterrupted nuisance wildlife corridor.
So it's basically an interstate system designed for humans, but fully co-opted by nature.
Completely. I mean, wildlife doesn't recognize property lines or zoning laws. They operate on biological imperatives. They want continuous cover from predators, access to fresh water, and direct routes to food.
Makes sense.
So when you build waterfront properties near places like Kings Point Village or Royal Shores, you are essentially paving over their historical transit routes.
Which means the shoreline behind those million-dollar homes is acting as a nightly highway for local fauna.
Yeah, exactly.
Raccoons, snakes, opossums, they are just commuting right through people's backyards every single night to get to the water.
It's just passing through.
But I want to make sure we connect this back to you, the listener, because you might be thinking, well, I don't live in a 14,000-acre forest in Texas, so why do I care?
You should care, because the physics of a house and the biology of a wild animal are universal.
Right.
A roof vent functions the exact same way in Seattle as it does in Kingwood. Understanding how wildlife actively searches for, tests, and exploits the structural weaknesses of the building you sleep in is vital knowledge.
Absolutely.
And more importantly, seeing how amateur attempts to remove these animals go horribly expensively wrong is a lesson everyone really needs to hear.
That brings us right to the front lines, the tactical response. If we look at the older established neighborhoods in Kingwood, places like Trailwood and Sand Creek, we are looking at homes built back in the 1970s.
Right, so older structures.
Yeah, so you have structures that are 50 years old. They have weathered roof lines. Now, to me, a weathered roof line just means I need to call a painter eventually. But to a wild animal...
Oh, to a squirrel or a bat, a weathered roof line is an engraved invitation.
Really? Just a little wear and tear?
Oh, yeah. We're talking about slight wood rot in the fascia boards, microscopic separations where different building materials meet, or, sealant that is degraded under decades of Texas sun.
Wow.
These are structural failures that animals have literally evolved to exploit.
So let's say a homeowner hears scratching in the ceiling. The immediate instinct is to grab a broom, maybe a ladder, and go play pest control.
Which introduces massive legal and physical liabilities.
Legal liabilities.
Yeah, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department maintains a strict list of protected wildlife species. The moment a wild animal crosses the threshold into your attic, you're no longer just doing home maintenance.
Yeah.
You are dealing with state and federal wildlife regulations.
Oh, wow.
It requires a licensed professional.
And looking at the operational data, the team handling this in Kingwood is the Critter team.
Right.
They were founded in 2015. They are fully licensed and insured. And what immediately jumps out at me is their structure. They run 100% in-house. Absolutely no subcontractors.
Which is rare in home services.
Very rare. And the owner, Mike Garrett, is a 20-year U.S. Army veteran. Their entire methodology is extremely rigid. It's poison-free, humane removal, full inspection, wildlife damage repair, cleanup, exclusion, and a written warranty.
That military background is really the operational spine of their success. If we connect this to the bigger picture, successful wildlife management isn't about brute force.
Yep.
It is entirely about logistics, strict operational protocols, and immense situational awareness. Mike Garrett and his technicians don't just wing it. They are trained through the National Wildlife Control Operators Association, or NWCOA.
Okay, so I have to push back here a little bit.
Sure.
I understand wanting a professional, but why do I need a military-grade tactical team to get a squirrel out of my attic? Why can't I just call a regular handyman, have him climb a ladder, and nail a piece of plywood over the hole?
This raises an important question, and it highlights the exact moment most homeowners make a catastrophic mistake.
Oh boy.
If you hire a handyman, you are hiring someone whose job is carpentry. They look up at your roof, they see a gap, and they patch the gap.
Makes sense on paper.
But a wildlife control operator looks at that same gap and sees a symptom of a living, breathing biological dynamic.
So the handyman is treating the symptom, not the disease.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is why the Critter team's no subcontractor policy is such a massive advantage. In home repair, if you sub out the work, you fracture the chain of custody.
Oh, I see.
If the guy who traps the animal doesn't perfectly communicate with the roofing contractor who seals the hole or the insulation crew that sanitizes the attic, you leave vulnerabilities. Keeping it 100% in-house ensures absolute quality control from the moment they step onto the property to the moment they sign the warranty.
That makes a lot of sense. The house isn't just a structure anymore, it's a compromised ecosystem.
Exactly.
So let's look at how that ecosystem gets invaded. The dossier points upward first. The biggest, most complex mistakes seem to happen at the highest points of the house.
Roofline.
Yeah, the roofline battlefield, what we'll call the aerial threats, bats and birds.
Let's start with bats because the stakes are incredibly high. According to the data, bats are the most commonly mishandled wildlife species in the greater Houston area.
Which is wild to me, because people are terrified of bats, and for good reason, right? I mean, the CDC explicitly warns that bats are the most common source of rabies exposure in the United States.
The rabies risk is significant, definitely. But the way bats interact with the house creates a more insidious, long-term hazard.
What do you mean?
Well, most homeowners have no idea they're hosting a bat colony until they notice the external signs. They might see guano, bat droppings, staining the glass on their windows, or piling up on the driveway right below the roofline.
Let's talk about how they actually get in. The dossier mentions the fascia boards. For anyone who isn't a roofer, the fascia is essentially that long straight board that runs along the lower edge of the roof, right where the gutters are attached.
And because bats are so small and their bodies are so compressible, any tiny warping in that fascia board or a gap where the trim meets the brick exterior is a massive open door.
Just a tiny gap.
Yeah. But what's really fascinating here is their behavior. Bats are creatures of intense habit. When a colony establishes a roost inside a structure, they don't wander around.
They stay put.
They hang in one very specific localized spot, and they defecate in that exact same spot.
Oh, gross. Which creates a highly concentrated biological hazard in your wall void or attic. So if I have a colony of bats in my house, my first thought is, get them out immediately. Maybe set a trap, or honestly, use a fumigant.
Which would be a violation of nearly every biological and legal guideline available.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The Texas A&M AgriLife Extension steps in with very clear mandates on this. Their bat management practices strongly recommend professional exclusion over any form of trapping or poisoning.
Why is that?
Think about the mechanics of poison. If you poison a colony of 50 bats inside your roof, you don't magically make them disappear.
Oh, no.
You now have 50 dead bats actively rotting inside your architecture. The odor and the resulting biohazard flies, Maggots, bacteria are far worse than the live bats,
That is a nightmare.
and trapping them is nearly impossible because of their flight patterns and numbers.
So here is where the specific expertise of the critter team comes into play. Mike Garrett holds the elite NWCOA bat standard certification, and they handle 30 to 40 of these highly complex bat exclusion projects every year. So how do they get them out without trapping or poisoning?
They use behavioral engineering. They install specialized one-way doors over the entry points.
I love the mechanics of this. It's essentially a wildlife turnstile.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Because bats have to leave the roost every evening at dusk to go on their nightly bug hunt, they push their way out through this temporary device. But the device is engineered so that it only opens outward.
Right.
When they return at dawn, the door is locked behind them. They can check out, but they cannot check back in.
It's a brilliant, non-lethal solution.
Yeah.
But the timing is everything. TPWD regulations allow for the removal of bats from occupied structures, but you have to possess an intimate knowledge of their seasonal biology.
You're talking about the maternity season.
Yes. There are specific months of the year when female bats are nursing flightless pups inside those roosts.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If a homeowner or an uneducated handyman puts up a one-way door during maternity season, the mothers will fly out to feed, but the babies are left trapped inside.
That's awful.
They will inevitably die, which is not only inhumane, but it immediately creates that massive odor and biological problem we just talked about trying to avoid.
So understanding the biological calendar is just as important as having the right tools.
Absolutely.
And even after the turnstile works and the colony is locked out, the job isn't done. The sources emphasize that the physical animal is only half the threat.
Right. The biological footprint left behind is the real danger. Guano can harbor the fungus that causes histoplasmosis, a severe respiratory infection.
Wow.
So the critter team has to go into that localized roosting area, safely remove all the contaminated insulation, sanitize the structural wood to kill off any spores, bacteria, and then replace the insulation.
It's a full decontamination.
Completely.
Now, while we are focused on the roofline, we have to talk about the other aerial threat, nuisance birds. Kingwood has these beautiful established trees, which means a massive avian population. And birds are exploiting entirely different weaknesses on the house.
Yeah, they aren't squeezing behind fascia boards.
Right, they are looking for cylinders.
They target the ventilation system. Roof vents, dryer exhaust vents, bathroom vents, and chimney flues. To a bird, a dryer vent is a pre-warmed, perfectly enclosed, predator-proof nesting box.
The primary culprits identified in the dossier are starlings, sparrows, and grackles. And the damage they cause is surprisingly aggressive. I wouldn't think a bird could do structural damage, but it comes down to chemistry.
It's the uric acid in their droppings. Bird droppings are highly corrosive. Over time, that acidity can actually eat into roofing materials, degrade sealants, and permanently stain siding or brickwork.
But the bigger issue happens when they nest inside those ventilation systems. If a starling builds a nest in your bathroom exhaust vent, the dried droppings and nesting materials are sitting right in the airflow path.
Which is really bad news.
Yeah, that creates airborne fungal spores. Every time the wind blows or the vent cycles, those spores are being pushed into the breathing air of your home.
This is a critical health hazard, and it's why swift removal is necessary. But this raises a massive legal complication. You cannot just climb a ladder with a shop vac and suck a bird nest out of your vent.
Right, because you might be stepping squarely into a federal crime.
Exactly. You're dealing with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, enforced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is federal law that protects the vast majority of native bird species in North America.
You can't touch them.
If you disturb an active nest of a protected species, meaning a nest with eggs or flightless chicks, you are exposing yourself to severe legal penalties. Ignorance of the law is not a valid defense.
So how does anyone ever get a bird out of their house?
Well, there is a caveat. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology provides guidance on this. The law protects native species. Certain birds, specifically European starlings, house sparrows, and pigeons, are classified as invasive or non-native species.
Okay.
Therefore, they are wholly unprotected under the Act.
But here's the problem for you, the listener. Can you, from 20 feet away, looking at a clump of twigs sticking out of a vent, accurately identify whether the bird flying in and out is an invasive sparrow or a federally protected native finch?
The average homeowner absolutely cannot, which is why professional identification is mandatory before any action is taken. The dossier notes that Mike Garrett is a bird barrier certified installer.
Which means what, exactly?
They have the expertise to identify the species, navigate the federal legalities, and then deploy professional-grade exclusion tactics.
And those tactics are fascinating. It's not just putting a piece of chicken wire over a hole. They use spiking systems, specialized netting, heavy-duty vent and chimney caps, and something called fogging.
Fogging is really interesting.
Can you explain the fogging mechanism? Because it sounds like pest control spray, but the dossier says it's totally humane.
It's a highly specialized form of area denial. The fogging compound usually utilizes a derivative of methylanthranilate, which is actually a naturally occurring compound found in Concord grapes.
I like grapes.
Yeah. To humans, it smells faintly sweet. But to a bird, it acts as a mild, temporary irritant to their trigeminal nerve, their mucous membranes.
Oh,
It doesn't harm them. It just makes the air in that specific area deeply uncomfortable to breathe. It safely conditions the flock to abandon the roosting site.
that is incredibly smart. Okay, so we've secured the fascia boards, we've capped the vents, and we've navigated the federal laws protecting the aerial threats. The roofline is supposedly secure.
For now.
Right. But what happens when larger, fundamentally stronger animals decide they want inside? Let's move from the tiny gaps to the massive breaches. Let's talk about the destructive acrobats, raccoons and squirrels.
This is where the physics of the damage scales up exponentially. Let's start with raccoons. We established that Kingwood is built along Lake Houston and the San Jacinto River.
Yeah.
Those waterways are not just scenic features. They're functional highways for raccoons to travel directly into residential neighborhoods.
And a raccoon is not looking for a dime-sized hole. They are targeting weak spots with brute force. The sources say they look for rotten plywood on the roof decking, soft connections where different roof angles meet, and those big 30 by 30 round mushroom vents.
What makes the raccoon so uniquely destructive is its biomechanics.
Oh.
Their front paws are incredibly similar to human hands. They possess opposable thumbs.
Which is terrifying.
Right. They don't just scratch at a hole. They can lift, pry, twist, and physically rip building materials apart.
So if a homeowner has a tiny bit of water damage on their roof deck, maybe a shingle blew off in a storm and the wood underneath got soft, a raccoon will find that soft spot, grab it with their hands, and tear a hole big enough to pull their entire body through.
That's the mechanism of entry. And once they're inside the attic, the devastation is immediate. They are large animals. They will crush and destroy HVAC ductwork just by walking on it or trying to nest inside it. And they use the blown-in insulation as a latrine, which completely compresses it, ruining the thermal value of the insulation and severely impacting the home's energy efficiency.
But the physical damage to the house pales in comparison to the biological threat. The CDC issues very stern warnings about a specific parasite carried by raccoons.
Yes, Belisoscaris procyonis, commonly known as raccoon roundworm.
Yeah.
This is a severe neurological hazard. The adult worms live in the raccoon's intestine, and they shed millions of microscopic eggs in the raccoon's feces.
And raccoons are communal when it comes to their latrines, right? Pick one spot in the attic and just pile it up.
Exactly. And those eggs are incredibly resilient. They can survive the environment for years.
Years.
Yeah. If a homeowner goes into their attic to investigate, or if those dry fecal particles become aerosolized and drop through unsealed ceiling fixtures, humans can accidentally ingest or inhale the eggs.
Oh my gosh.
Once inside a human host, the larvae hatch and migrate through the body, potentially reaching the eyes or the brain. It is a ticking biological time bomb.
How does a homeowner even know a raccoon is targeting their roof? Obviously, you'd hear a heavy animal walking above your ceiling, but externally, what are the signs?
The technicians look for specific tracking indicators. You might find muddy footprints on your aluminum gutters or downspouts. A raccoon has absolutely no problem scaling a vertical brick wall or a downspout, even if you have meticulously trimmed all your tree branches away from the roofline.
The dossier also mentions the droppings. If you find droppings on your roof or in the attic that look like they came from a medium-sized dog, that is your confirmation you have a raccoon.
When the critter team gets called out for a raccoon, the tactical response is very specific. They utilize humane, species-specific traps. And crucially, their equipment is selected to be safe around children and household pets, which is a massive relief for a homeowner.
I would imagine so.
But as we've discussed, trapping is only the first step.
Right, because Texas A&M AgriLife Extension raccoon management resources are unequivocal on this. Exclusion after trapping is the only long-term solution.
Because if you just trap and relocate the raccoon, you have fundamentally solved nothing. You still have a massive, raccoon-sized hole ripped through your shingles and decking.
It's just an open door.
It is an open invitation, and another raccoon or entire family of squirrels will move in within days. The critter team has to execute the trap, then repair the soffits, the fascia, the ductwork, and structurally reinforce that entry point so it cannot be breached again.
Now let's contrast the heavy brute force of the raccoon with the hyperactive, frantic destruction of the squirrel. In Kingwood, the dense tree canopy essentially creates a bridge to nearly every single roofline in the community.
Yeah, they don't even need the downspout.
Exactly. A squirrel doesn't even have to climb your brick wall. They just drop directly onto your shingles from an oak branch.
And their methodology for breaching the house is entirely different. They don't have the heavy hands of a raccoon. They rely on their teeth. They tend to chew through the soft architectural connections, specifically the soffit.
Let's define the soffit for the listener. If you stand outside your house and look up at the roof overhang, the material underneath that overhang running horizontally back to the wall of the house is the soffit. It's often vented to allow airflow into the attic.
And it is a notoriously weak point. A squirrel will hang upside down, grab onto the edge of the fascia or the gutter, and chew directly upward through the soffit material to access the attic void.
This brings us to what makes squirrels so uniquely terrifying for a homeowner. Raccoons cause damage because they are large and clumsy. Squirrels cause damage because of their fundamental biology. They are rodents, which means their front incisors never stop growing.
That is the biological imperative driving the destruction. If a squirrel doesn't constantly gnaw on hard materials, their teeth will grow into their own skulls.
Wow, I didn't know
They
that.
have to file them down. When a squirrel sets up a nest in your attic, they don't just sleep there. They chew. They chew on structural roof joists. They chew on PVC plumbing pipes.
And worst of all, they chew on electrical wiring. The K-State Research and Extension Guide actually documents this specific hazard. It is not that the squirrel is maliciously attacking your power grid. Chewing your copper wiring is just their version of using an emery board, but the result is catastrophic.
They strip the protective plastic insulation right off the wires. You are left with bare, live copper wires carrying high voltage, sitting directly next to bone-dry structural wood and highly flammable, fluffy attic insulation.
But grief.
It is the literal definition of a house fire waiting to happen.
Identifying a squirrel infestation requires a much more trained eye than spotting a raccoon. The dossier mentions a tracking method that technicians use called looking for little toes in the dust.
Because they are lighter, they don't crush the ductwork.
Yeah.
But if you shine a flashlight across the top of the dusty HVAC ducts in an attic, you will see tiny, distinct, frantic little footprints.
Just little trails.
You will also see narrow, carved-out trails running like miniature highways through the blown-in insulation. That confirms you are dealing with squirrels.
To handle them, the critter team uses multiple catch traps, because where there is one squirrel, there are usually several. And for the defense, they are an authorized North Houston distributor for the RidgeGuard Certified Installer Program, which uses specialized animal-proof metal mesh to protect the roof ridge caps and vents.
It's top-tier defense.
But I want to circle back here. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the handyman again, because the dossier hammers this point home. The handyman special is the most dangerous thing a homeowner can do when dealing with squirrels.
It is the ultimate violation of wildlife management principles.
Let's paint the picture. A homeowner hears frantic scratching in the ceiling. They go outside, they look up, and they see a baseball-sized hole chewed through their wooden soffit. Instead of calling a professional, they call a guy who comes over with a ladder, a drill, and a piece of sheet metal. He slaps the metal over the hole, drives in 4 screws, and says, "There you go, hole fix. What just happened?"
Well, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Wildlife Damage Management Guide states the rule unequivocally. Exclusion must follow removal, never precede it.
Never.
By patching that hole, without scientifically confirming the animal is gone, the homeowner has just trapped a highly energetic, terrified wild animal inside the walls of their house.
And a trapped squirrel doesn't just sit in the insulation and politely accept its fate.
Absolutely not. The panic response kicks in. It becomes a desperate, trapped demolition crew. It will use those constantly growing teeth to try and chew its way out.
It's trying to escape.
Right. But because it's disoriented in the dark, it rarely chews back out through the roof. Often, it chews downward. It will gnaw right through the half-inch drywall of your ceiling, and suddenly you have a frantic, soot-covered squirrel dropping directly into your living room.
Or even worse, it can't chew through. It exhausts itself, and it dies deep inside a wall void, which triggers a terrifying chain of events we're going to cover in detail in a few minutes.
So to summarize the acrobats, raccoons use opposable thumbs and brute strength. Squirrels use biological necessity and sharp teeth. Both require military-level trapping, followed by structural reinforcement.
But while the raccoons and squirrels are making a racket up in the ceiling, there is another invader operating in total silence, one that doesn't need to rip a hole in your roof because it exploits the microscopic structural flaws your house was built with. We are talking about the domino effect. Roof rats.
This is where the concept of the house as a porous border truly becomes terrifying. We said a raccoon needs a piece of rotten wood. A squirrel needs a soffit connection. A roof rat needs almost nothing.
Let's look at their entry requirements. If you are sitting in your home right now, think about the exterior of your house. Think about where the brick meets the siding or where the air conditioning lines penetrate the wall to connect to the outside unit. The sources state that every single gap larger than a dime is a potential entry point for a roof rat. A single dime. How is that physically possible?
It comes down to skeletal anatomy. Roof rats have incredibly collapsible, articulated skeletons. The biological rule of thumb is, if they can force their skull through a gap, the rest of the body will temporarily compress and slide right through.
It's like they're liquid.
Basically, they are exploiting the tiny, inevitable imperfections in construction.
And the problem with roof rats in a place like Kingwood is their sheer persistence and the level of biocontamination they bring with them. Because unlike bats, which have a very designated localized bathroom area in the attic, roof rats have zero biological control over their bowels.
They cannot control where they defecate. As they run across your attic joists or scramble through your wall voids, they are continuously scattering droppings and urine.
Which brings us to the severe health hazard. The CDC's guidelines on hantavirus prevention are deeply concerning. Rodent urine, droppings, and saliva can carry hantavirus.
And the transmission mechanism is what makes it so dangerous. You don't have to be bitten by a rat to contract it. When those droppings dry out in the intense heat of a Texas attic, the virus particles can become aerosolized.
So they're in the air.
Right. If you sweep the attic, or if the HVAC system pulls air from that space, you can inhale the virus. The EPA confirms that a roof rat infestation is not just a nuisance. It elevates the attic to a biohazard zone.
So how does the critter team combat a dime-sized enemy that brings that level of contamination? The Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Integrated Pest Management Action Plan spells out the protocol. Trapping and rigorous exclusion are the only permanent solutions.
And I want the listener to explicitly notice what is absent from that action plan: poison.
Which feels completely counterintuitive. If I go to any major hardware store right now, there is an entire aisle dedicated to massive buckets of rat poison. The consumer market pushes poison as the primary solution. Why is using poison on roof rats considered a catastrophic failure of logic?
Because you have to understand the mechanism of the poison and the biology of a dying animal. Rat poisons are typically anticoagulants. When a rat ingests the bait, it doesn't instantly die. It takes days. The rat begins to feel incredibly sick. And biological instinct dictates that a sick, vulnerable animal will retreat to the deepest, darkest, most inaccessible area it can find to hide from predators.
Which, in a house, means they crawl down into a sealed wall void or underneath a subfloor.
Exactly. They retreat into the architecture and die. Now, instead of a live rat problem, you have a rotting carcass problem sealed behind your drywall.
That is disgusting.
Furthermore, poisoning the rat accomplishes absolutely nothing structurally. You just killed one rat, but that dime-sized gap around your AC line is still wide open. You just vacated the territory for the next 50 rats in the neighborhood to move in.
It is the ultimate example of treating a symptom while ignoring the disease. The critter team's protocol relies on trapping the existing population and then executing a full perimeter exclusion. They have to seal every single entry point. And the dossier notes they use materials specifically chosen for this environment: galvanized mesh, solid metal flashing, and specialized clear sealants.
Because the environment dictates the defense. In Houston's notorious humidity, cheap steel wool or standard caulk will rust out or degrade within a single season. The exclusion materials have to be weatherproof and bite-proof.
But the rat infestation is really just the first domino falling, because we are talking about an ecosystem. And in the wild, where there is an abundance of prey animals, a predator inevitably follows.
Which introduces the secondary invader: snakes.
Kingwood's proximity to the water and the dense forest puts it right in the middle of a massive shared territory for both venomous and non-venomous snakes. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Guide to Venomous Snakes highlights 4 specific species of concern in the greater Houston area: copperheads, cottonmouths, rattlesnakes, and coral snakes.
It is a robust reptilian population, and it's important to understand how they interact with human structures. A snake doesn't have the teeth to chew through wood like a squirrel, and they don't have the hands of a raccoon.
How did they get in?
They slither through the exact same structural flaws the roof rats use. Those weak vents, gaps under the rubber seal of a garage door, or those unsealed AC line penetrations.
But the critical question is, why are they coming in? I want the listener to really absorb this point because when I read the dossier, it completely shifted my perspective. If you walk into your garage or look up into your rafters and you see a snake, it is not lost. It hasn't just stumbled out of the woods by accident to look around.
No, absolutely not. Snakes operate on very simple primal hardware. The sources clarify that snakes are motivated by 3 things: hibernating, mating, and eating.
Okay.
If it is the middle of the summer, they aren't hibernating. If it's not their specific mating season, they are hunting.
They are following a food source. They are at a restaurant. If a snake forces its way into your wall void, it means something fuzzy, warm, and delicious is already living in your wall void.
The snake is a secondary symptom of a primary rodent infestation. The indoor environment of the home has perfectly replicated the outdoor food chain. The rats provide the food, the insulation provides the nesting cover, and the snake simply follows the scent trail right through the dime-sized gap.
When the critter team responds to a snake call, they arrive quickly to capture and relocate both venomous and non-venomous species. But the crucial part of their methodology is that they don't just leave with the snake. They have to address the underlying attraction.
Right.
They investigate the property, seal the entries, and begin a trapping program to eradicate the rodent population that drew the predator in to begin with.
Because if you just remove the snake, another one will pick up the scent trail of the rats the very next day. And a quick safety note derived from the dossier. The Texas A&M Field Guide to Texas Snakes is a fantastic resource for identifying scale patterns and head shapes. But if you encounter a snake inside your home, do not pull out your smartphone. Get within striking distance and try to cross-reference the markings.
Call a professional. Don't be a hero. They have a 247 team available for exactly this reason. Okay, so we have secured the roof line, we've cleared the attic, and we've sealed the wall voids. Now we need to move our attention down to the soil. We need to talk about the ground force, the animals that attack the footprint of the property from below: skunks, armadillos, and opossums.
The dynamic shifts completely at ground level. Up on the roof, animals are trying to breach the climate-controlled envelope of the attic. At ground level, they are exploiting the exterior footprint, the decks, the foundations, the sheds.
Let's start with skunks. In a place like Kingwood, skunks are notorious for digging under concrete porches, under wooden decks, and along the edges of backyard sheds to build their dens. They're looking for structural shelter from the elements, but they are also establishing a base camp near a steady food supply.
And their primary food source in a residential neighborhood consists of grubs and insects found in the soil.
The conflict with skunks is almost entirely domestic. The Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Guide to Striped Skunks outlines their denning habits, but the reality is that the homeowner rarely discovers the skunk first. It is almost always the family dog that makes the discovery during a late-night bathroom break in the backyard.
And the dog loses that physical and chemical argument every single time.
Every time.
It is an absolute disaster for the homeowner. But what the A&M guide highlights is the site fidelity of the skunk. Skunks will return to the exact same property, to the exact same den under a deck, repeatedly if you don't perform structural exclusion.
They just keep coming back.
You can hire someone to trap a skunk, but if that dark, hollow space under your deck is still accessible, a new skunk will claim the territory within weeks.
Which is why the critter team uses highly specialized humane trapping methods designed specifically to minimize the stress on the animal and mitigate the risk of a spray incident. It is a delicate tactical operation. Once the animal is safely removed, they focus on the den site.
They perform what is known as trench exclusion. You can't just staple chicken wire to the bottom of the deck because a skunk will just dig under it.
That makes sense.
The technicians have to dig a trench around the perimeter of the structure, install heavy-duty exclusion wire that extends vertically down into the soil and then bends outward in an L shape. This L footer ensures that when an animal tries to dig under the barrier, they hit a horizontal wall of steel mesh and give up.
They also provide professional odor treatment for properties where the dog has already triggered the defense mechanism, which is a lifesaver. But the skunk isn't the only one hunting for grubs. Enter the armadillo. Now, armadillos are fascinating because they look like these slow, armored, prehistoric creatures, but they cause incredibly rapid, modern structural problems.
They will absolutely decimate a Kingwood lawn overnight. They dig these very distinct Jeep cone-shaped holes across manicured yards and garden beds as they root relentlessly for grubs and earthworms.
And here is where we uncover a brilliant biological irony in the dossier. Think about the suburban ideal. Homeowners spend thousands of dollars on sprinkler systems to cultivate a beautiful, lush green lawn.
Right.
But in the intense baking heat of a Texas summer, the natural, unwatered soil becomes hard as concrete and devoid of surface insects.
By heavily irrigating the lawn, the homeowner is artificially raising the moisture level of the soil, which draws the grubs and earthworms to the surface.
Well,
You are accidentally cultivating an all-you-can-eat biological buffet.
you are practically sending out an embossed invitation to every armadillo in Harris County to come dine at your house. It is an unnatural oasis. And while waking up to a torn-up lawn is frustrating, the real danger is mechanical. When the armadillo decides the food is so good that it wants to build a burrow right next to the foundation of your house.
The structural risk increases incredibly fast at that point. Armadillos are prolific diggers.
Mm-hmm.
When they burrow alongside a concrete foundation slab, they are physically removing the compacted soil that supports the weight of the house. Over time, that undermining can cause the concrete slab to crack, shift, or sink, leading to tens of thousands of dollars in foundational repair.
The Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Guide to Armadillo Management details the specific trapping methods required. Armadillos have terrible eyesight. You can't just put bait in a cage and hope they see it.
Because of their poor vision, they rely heavily on tactile feedback and familiar pathways. The technicians have to identify their physical travel paths, often along fences or the edge of the house, and set professional-grade traps directly in their way, sometimes using physical funnels to guide the armadillo right into the trap, using its own predictable blind movements against it.
It's all about understanding the biology. And finally, on the ground level, we have the ultimate opportunist, the opossum.
Opossums are North America's only marsupial, and they are the ultimate scavengers. They will get under homes, squeeze into open sheds, tear into unsecured garbage, and occasionally even climb up into attics if the access is easy enough.
The University of Nebraska-Lincoln Wildlife Damage Management Guide covers them extensively. They are opportunistic omnivores. They don't usually rip new holes in houses, but they will exploit any gap left open by a raccoon or a rotting board. The dossier notes an identification tip. If you find droppings around your property or on a low roof that look like they came from a small dog, and you've ruled out raccoons, it is highly likely you have an opossum.
The critter team handles opossums with the same rigorous methodology. Humanely trap, relocate, inspect the entire property for the opportunistic entry points, and seal them up tight.
Okay, so we've walked through the entire anatomy of the house. We've gone from the chimney flues, down the roofline, through the attic, into the wall voids, and down to the concrete foundation. We've talked about the animals, the unique damage they do, and the elite tactics used to remove and exclude them. But we have to address one final, incredibly grim reality mentioned in the operational data, the unthinkable scenario. What happens when the animal doesn't make it out?
The dead animal removal. It is the darkest, most unpleasant, but arguably the most critical service the critter team provides.
We touched on this when we discussed the catastrophic mistake of using rat poison. I want you to imagine the intense, suffocating heat of a Houston summer. The temperature inside a sealed wall void can easily exceed 120 degrees. Now imagine a deceased animal, a poisoned rat, a trapped squirrel, or a raccoon that died of natural causes, decaying inside that space.
The consequences are immediate, severe, and compounding. The odor is the first sign, and it is room clearing. It is a dense, heavy smell that gets exponentially worse every single day. The gases from the decomposition actually seep into the porous drywall and embed themselves into the fabrics, carpets, and upholstery of the home.
But the smell is just the alarm bell. The real concern is what is happening biologically inside the wall.
A decomposing carcass immediately attracts flies, which lay eggs, leading to an infestation of maggots within 48 hours. As the tissue breaks down, it breeds massive colonies of bacteria. And in a domino effect, the scent of the decay attracts secondary pests, other scavengers like ants, roaches, or even more rodents drawn to the biological material.
It rapidly evolves into a full-blown biohazard inside the envelope of your home. And this is another situation where a homeowner cannot just DIY the problem. You can't drag a dead raccoon out of your wall and throw it in the neighborhood municipal trash can.
No, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ, has strict legal guidance and regulations regarding the disposal of biological waste and deceased animals.
This scenario is the ultimate closing argument against using DIY poisons or uncertified handymen. If you patch a hole with a squirrel inside, or you feed a roof rat anticoagulant bait, you are practically guaranteeing this outcome. And finding the carcass is an incredibly specialized skill. A homeowner does not have the tools or the training to pinpoint a rotting rat hidden somewhere inside a 20-foot stretch of sealed, insulated wall void. If you guess wrong, you are smashing holes in your drywall with a hammer for hours, destroying your own house.
It requires extreme precision. The technicians use their understanding of airflow, temperature, moisture, and even the specific flight patterns of the blowflies in the house to narrow down the exact location of the carcass.
The Critter team offers same-day or next-day service for this specific emergency. They arrive, they scientifically locate the carcass, they make the smallest, most precise cut into the drywall necessary to access the void, they safely extract the biohazard, and then critically, they treat the entire area with professional-grade enzymes for absolute odor elimination and full sanitation.
Think about the sheer psychological relief a homeowner must feel in that moment. You are dealing with a situation that makes your own home physically unlivable. It is something you physically cannot handle, and from a health perspective, ethically should not handle yourself. And this military precision team arrives, identifies the exact problem, surgically removes the hazard, sanitizes the structure, and gives you your home back. The value of that is immeasurable.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, analyzing the biology, the architecture, and the operations. What is the ultimate takeaway from this deep dive into the Critter team's protocols in Kingwood?
If we synthesize all their operational data, alongside the stringent state and federal guidelines, the overarching philosophy of the Critter team becomes crystal clear. It is never, ever just about removing the animal. Removing the animal is a temporary Band-Aid.
It's treating a symptom.
Exactly. I mean, that is the core truth of it. True wildlife management is a comprehensive science. It is about deeply understanding the animal's biology, why they chose the house, how they breached it, and what biological hazards they left behind. It's about repairing the physical damage, like full attic restoration and ductwork repair. It is about sealing the fortress through rigorous professional exclusion, backing that physical work with written warranties, and doing it all humanely with a 100% in-house team to guarantee the chain of custody. It's a scientific approach to an inevitable conflict.
And for those listening who live in the Kingwood area, and this includes the surrounding vulnerable zones like the Lake Houston waterfront, the San Jacinto River corridors, and those older established neighborhoods like Trailwood and Sand Creek, knowing exactly who to call before a small scratching noise becomes a biohazard disaster is key. They are available 24/7 for these emergencies. So if you're a homeowner, grab a pen. Here is their exact contact information. Phone 281-667-0171. Address 6942 FM 1960 RDE, hashtag 211, Humble, TX 77346.
Having that number saved in your phone is literally the difference between a minor weekend inconvenience and a catastrophic structural nightmare.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a lingering thought. We started this conversation talking about the illusion of the house as a submarine, this idea that we build an impenetrable fortress that creates a hard line separating us from the wild.
The myth of the porous border.
But consider those 14,000 acres of Kingwood Forest. Consider the 75 miles of greenbelt trails intertwining with the driveways and the sidewalks. The oak trees were there first. The river was there first. When a raccoon uses the river as a highway to reach your attic, or when an armadillo digs under your beautifully irrigated concrete foundation to find grubs, are they truly invading your home? Or in the grand scheme of the ecosystem, are you simply living in theirs? It forces us to rethink our place in the natural world. Recognizing that porous border and respecting these animals through humane professional boundaries really is the only sustainable way to coexist. Until next time, keep your eyes on the roofline.